Pre-calculus. Woohoo! These are the notes for 9B. We're going to do some proving trig identities. Super exciting. You have all the tools you need for this. It just takes a little practice, of course. But essentially all we're going to be doing is to prove an identity, we want to take one side of the equation and we want to rewrite it, simplify it, so that it ends up equaling the other side of the equation. And then that shows that we've proven that both expressions equal each other. And then at the end, once you show that you're done, you put in a little mark on there to show that you have proven it. So back in the old days, we would write QED, which is some Latin term to say we have proven it. Then other people, as you can see on the notes, put a little filled in square, it's called, to show that they're finished. Or some people will put their initials on there, or a smiley face, or now that we have emojis, you can draw in your own emoji if you want. But so just some kind of symbol to say, I did it. A little celebration. Well, okay, so first strategy here, we're going to just simplify, like I said, the left side of the equation. I'm going to start with sine times secant x minus cosecant x. So the first thing we're going to do is write down that side that we're starting with. So just a way to represent this is which side I'm going to use and simplify. So I'm going to write down the sine of x times secant x minus cosecant x. I mean, if you really wanted a big challenge, you could start with the right side, the tangent x minus 1, and try to rewrite that so that it matches the left side. But it tends to be, I don't know if the right word is easier, to start with the busier side of the equation and simplify it down to the less busy side of the equation. Okay, so that's the side I'm starting with. Now I'm going to rewrite in terms of sine and cosine. So just like we did in our previous notes or sections. So the secant I am going to rewrite as 1 over cosine of x. And the cosecant I'm going to rewrite as 1 over the sine of x. And that's in my parentheses. And I still have the sine of x multiplied on the outside of the equation. So now I'm going to distribute. I'm going to multiply the sine of x times 1 over cosine of x and times 1 over sine of x. So that's going to get me the sine of x over the cosine of x minus the sine of x over the sine of x. And then I have one more step to simplify. So sine over cosine I know is the tangent of x. And sine divided by sine is 1. And that's now equal to the right side of my equation. So I did it. So I'm going to write in some symbol. So I'm going to put a little smiley face. Again, you can put a square filled in. Whatever you want. Hopefully that's clear. Hey, remember we have office hours. So you're welcome to meet with Mrs. McKay or myself on our Google Classroom. Check out the Google stream in your class to see when those times are. But, we're here to help, and we miss seeing your guys' faces. So please show up, ask us questions. We love to help. Okay, example 2. Again, we're going to begin with the more complicated expression, and we're going to work down to the simplify it down to the less complicated. Always going back to sine and cosine, that tends to really be the easiest way, simplifies everything. And then combine your fractions. you know, same thing we did when we were in middle school, but now we've got some crazy looking fractions, but we want to use common denominators. All right, I'm going to start on the left side because that's the addition one, so that's a little bit more complicated than multiplying. So I'm going to write down the tangent of x plus the cotangent of x. Remember, you start with, you writing down which side you're going to use. And then I'm going to rewrite my tangent in terms of sine and cosine. So I'll have sine of x divided by the cosine of x, plus cotangent would be cosine of x divided by the sine of x. So these denominators are different, so I'm going to multiply both of these fractions so that I have a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply the first fraction by the sine of x over the sine of x. And then the second fraction, I'm going to multiply by cosine x times cosine x. This is going to give me common denominators. So now my common denominator is going to be the sine of x times the cosine of x. And my first fraction then is going to be sine x times sine x, or sine squared x. The second fraction is going to have the same denominator. And the numerator then would be cosine x times cosine x, so cosine squared x. I'm running out of room, so I'm going to have to move this guy up here. So now my denominators are the same. I can add my numerators. So it goes, I could write that as sine squared x plus cosine squared x over our common denominator, which is sine of x times cosine of x. Next up, I'm going to remember my Pythagorean trig identity, the very first one that we learned. Sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1 over sine of x times the cosine of x. So now at this point, it looks like it's pretty simplified, so I'm going to look back to the original equation and notice that the right side of my equation is secant x times cosecant of x. So if I notice the fraction that I have right now, 1 over the sine of x is cosecant. And 1 over cosine of x is secant. And so to make this look just like the right side of my equation, I would just switch order and write that as the secant of x times the cosecant of x. And now I've done it. Yay! Moving on. See, these aren't that bad. You just gotta, keep practicing, use all the simplifying skills that you have, focus on sine and tangent. Sine and cosine. And tangent, of course. So next ones, where our strategies are remembering that when we multiply two binomials together, and one's a sum and one's a difference of the same terms, you're going to end up with a squared minus b squared, so it gets rid of those middle terms when we distribute. And then that probably will lead to our Pythagorean identities. And then remember that we are trying, which side we're trying to get to. Keep that in mind. Always focus on that, and that will kind of help guide you when you're feeling lost. Okay, so I'm going to start with the left side of my equation, the cosine x over 1 minus the sine of x. Because it looks a little more complicated to me because of the denominator is 1 minus the sine of x. So that's a little bit less simplified than the right side of the equation. So I'm writing down the side I'm starting with, cosine of x divided by 1 minus the sine of x. And I'm trying to get to the right side of the equation. So like I said, the denominator is not very simplified to me, so I'm going to use the strategy up above where it shows us to multiply by, this is an a minus b, so I'm going to multiply by an a plus b. So I'm going to rewrite my equation, or my expression, cosine of x over 1 minus the sine of x. And then I'm going to multiply the numerator and the denominator by a plus b, or 1 plus the sine of x. And I'm doing that because I'm trying to get to using some trig identities, and this, when I multiply my denominators now, I'm going to end up with a squared term, a squared sign, and just a binomial. So it's magic. I'll show you. So we'll start by multiplying the numerator, but actually I'm just going to leave it as cosine of x times 1 plus the sine of x. And then the denominator, remember foiling, we multiply the outside, first outside, inside, last, all that fun stuff. We're going to do that. And we'll get 1, I'll write it out the steps, 1 times 1, and then 1 times the sine of x, and then negative sine of x times 1, and then negative sine x times sine x will give us negative sine x squared. Okay, numerator is still the cosine of x times 1 plus the sine of x. And our denominator now, the x, or the positive sine x and the negative sine x are going to cancel out. And so we're just going to get 1 minus the sine squared of x. So now maybe you can see why we multiplied the numerator and denominator by 1 plus the sine of x, because now our denominator is a Pythagorean identity, the very first one. And so it can now be rewritten as just cosine squared x. And I still have my numerator, which is cosine of x times 1 plus the sine of x. Okay, and so now our next step is we can simplify, we can divide out that cosine of x here with one of the cosines of x there. And we end up with 1 plus the sine of x over just a cosine of x. And we did it, because see, that's what our right side of our original equation was. So fun. Awesome. Okay, we're going to try again. This time we've got cosecant x divided by cotangent squared of x, and we want it to end up equaling tangent times the secant. So again, we have a fraction on the left and just tangent and secant on the right. So let's start with the left side. That looks a little bit more complicated than the right side. So secant x divided by cotangent squared x. Remember, we write down what we're starting with, which side we're going to simplify. And then let's try writing in terms of sine and cosine. So the I'm going to separate these out just to help us see the steps a little bit better. So I'm going to rewrite this as the cosecant times 1 over cotangent squared x. So I'm just separating my two terms up above. So then I can see the cosecant of x that can be rewritten as 1 over the sine of x. And then 1 over the cotangent, which is the same as tangent squared. Sorry, 1 over cotangent squared is the same as tangent squared. So I can rewrite that as sine squared over cosine squared x. Now we can simplify. So this sine is going to cancel out one of those signs. And I'll just have a sine of x over cosine squared of x. Oh, we're so close. Cosine squared in the denominator can be rewritten as cosine of x times cosine of x. And then I'm doing that so that you can see then sine of x divided by the cosine x here is just tangent of x. And then times 1 over cosine of x. And I know 1 over cosine of x is the secant of x. So we've got tangent of x times the secant of x, which is what we wanted. Yay! Oops, I don't want to box that. I want to put my little smiley face. Woohoo! Did it! Okay, yes, proving takes some practice. You gotta know all this, like which direction to go. That's usually the most difficult. So try to follow these general strategies that we have, and please, please, please show up for the Google Meets. Just contact us if you need any help. We're here for you guys. Good luck. The quiz is going to be not on My Open Math this time. It's a proving quiz. We're just going to have it show up on the Google Classroom. So you'll need to write it out and upload a picture as always, but it will be on the Google Classroom and not on My Open Math this week. Okay, take care, you guys. Hope to see your face soon. Bye.